What's up, my Shadowverse scholars, and welcome back to another Enverse Academy episode. So with the release of set 3, there was a deck that came out, that being Hero Sword, and when I played against it the first time, I was so confused on what it did and what was happening. So this is what the point of Enverse Academy is to educate you on what they're going to be doing, what's going to happen, and what to look out for when they're playing against the deck. So let's go ahead and figure out what Hero Sword does. So what we're looking at today is Hero Aggro. So they're going to be playing 1-drops, 2-drops, and 3-drops. And mostly those 3-drops are going to be either in the form of Floral Fencer or one of the new cards, that being Mock Knight, that, you know, really generates some value off of being played in a place other than your hand. And it's going to be a lot. You're going to be taking a lot of damage very early if you're not playing control deck to really, you know, smoothen that out. Or if you're not running Bell Ringers. Bell Ringers do really help. But let's figure out what the pros and cons are of running Hero Aggro before we get into the breakdown. So the pros and cons of Hero Aggro we have in the form of it's fast, it has hard aggro, has pretty strong followers in the early game, and then, you know, your Swordcraft, so you had Leonidas. On the downside, you can gas out like you do in Abysscraft Aggro. There's not much draw because you don't have soul conversion, and then it's very glass cannony, so if you miss on one of your spell cards, it feels really bad. I mean, it's a rare chance that it does happen, but, you know, if you do miss on that, you wasted a whole turn to do nothing. So, and there's scarce removal, because you're Swordcraft. There's not much removal, you only have in the form of Tokyo and Unbridled Fury. So let's figure out what in the world this deck does. Alright, so with the release of set 3, there was a card that is Heroic Entry. It's a 3-drop. So you look at the top 4 cards of your deck, you may put a Swordcraft follower that costs 3 play points or less from among them onto your field. If it's a heroic follower, give it +1/+1 and put the remaining cards at the bottom of your deck in any order. So there, if you know Swordcraft, there are a lot of 3-drops. We're gonna go over all the 3-drops that you're able to play off of this card alone, but you really want to go for a heroic follower so you can get that +1/+1. And let's go ahead and figure out what the other cards that are heroic that you can play off of this card. So here are all the cards that came out with the heroic ability in set 3, and they are in the form of Mock Knight, Ironward Defender, and Amiro Spear Knight. So the first card we have is the Mock Knight, and it has an ability of when it's played from anywhere else besides your hand, it gains Storm. And this is the optimal card that you want to play off of with Heroic Entry, because he gets Storm, and then with the Heroic Entry, second half of the ability gets +1/+1, so it'll be a 4/4 with Storm swinging at you. Not too of an optimal card that you want to play off of Heroic Entry, and that's Ironward Defender, since he costs 1, but he will have that +1/+1 if you play him though. But he has an ability too, if there are 2 heroic cards in your cemetery, give this follower +1 defense and ward, which is very good as a 1-drop when you're swinging so aggressively. And then lastly, the card that we have is Amiro Spear Knight. He has an ability, you know, strike, so when he swings, if there's another heroic follower on your field, give this follower +1/+1. And that's it. And, you know, on the fact that he already gets +1/+1 off of the Heroic Entry, so he'll be a 4/4 as well. If he, unfortunately, doesn't swing the same turn. But, you know, when he does swing, he'll be a 4/4. These cards generate so much value for the deck. I mean, just look at their costs. They're 1-drops, 2-drops, and 3-drops. It literally screams aggro, because Abyss aggro has the same type of thing. It's just Swordcraft is doing it, and they get a buff added to them, because you can play them from the deck instead of having them in your hand. So that's what makes this pretty good, because, you know, if the RNG works with you, if you build your deck and cater it to, you know, go off of Heroic Entry, it's going to do very dandy. You'll have 2 sources of playing followers just from outside of your hand, which is pretty neat. Alright, let's go ahead and take a little quick peek at what the other 3-drops you can play off of Heroic Entry. They won't get a buff, but these are other cards that it just says a Swordcraft follower. It doesn't say heroic follower. They just don't get a buff, and here are the other cards. And just by looking at these 3-drops, this is some value. You've got Floral Fencer to get some more bodies out. You have Gemstaff Commander to search for any Swordcraft follower that you need. You have Novice Trooper, that so even if you don't get the Mock Knight, you'll still have a 3-drop Storm follower you want to swing with. And then you have the Pompous Princess, if you're running the Pompous Princess line. And then the fact that you can get any follower that costs 1 play point, you can go ahead and get the Ironward Defender out, or a Swordsman, or even a Quick Blader if you need it. So let's figure out what the legendary for this deck does, and that is Valiant Fencer. So for 3, you can evolve them for 1, but you can only evolve them if you have 2 or less cards in your hand. And then when you come to the play, you search your deck for a heroic card with a different name from this card, reveal it and add it to your hand. So that's just not followers, you can reveal a Heroic Entry too if you have more in your deck. And then when he evolves, so on evolve, you select a heroic follower with evolve on your field and you evolve it. Just this card already gives so much for the deck. The fact that you can evolve him for 1 and he turns to a 5/5. So if there's something that's really pesky and you really need to get rid of, you can evolve him and go ahead and swing into like a ward or something and get rid of that, and the other follower that you evolved can swing face. It's pretty good. I think it's a pretty nice combo. Let's go ahead and figure out what heroic followers you can evolve with this card. So here are the 2 cards that you're able to evolve with the Valiant Fencer, and that is in the form of Mock Knight and Emiro Spear Knight. So the Mock Knight Evo, so on evolve, you select the enemy follower on the field and deal it 2 damage. If there are 2 heroic cards in your cemetery, you deal 4 damage instead. And the more optimal one that you really want to do is the Emiro Spear Knight Evo. So on evolve, you select the heroic card in your cemetery, you play for 0 play points, and then he still has that ability for strike. So when he swings, if there's another heroic follower on your field, give this follower +1/+1. So yet again, so much value just happening for so less. So you played that Valiant Fencer, you already have one of these guys out, they're able to swing. Let's say you have a Emiro Spear Knight, he's a little 2-drop, and you can evolve him for 3 evil. Well, hey look, you can get past that with Valiant Fencer by evolving for 1. Evolving a Emiro Spear Knight, you can go ahead and select a heroic card, that being either heroic entry or any heroic follower, and use it and play it. And you can get any 3-drop off the top 4 of your deck, which generates so much value because you're getting it off your deck. And yeah, I understand Mock Knight is still pretty nice and everything, but the fact that Emiro Spear Knight just generates so much value and you can have so much board presence after you play heroic entry for free from your cemetery and then get another follower, it's just so much that your opponent has to deal with. And if they don't have access to like board wipes, even though everyone does, but it is costly to use it, but if they don't already have like a board wipe into their kit, like Conflagration or like that, then you're really in the running for swinging very wide very fast, because you evolved the Valiant Fencer, he's a 5/5, you evolved Emiro Spear Knight, he's a 3/3, and when he swings he becomes a 4/4, and then you played something, and then if that being one of the heroic entries from the Emiro ability, you get that Mock Knight, he comes in with Storm, and then he has that 4/4, and you'll be swinging for just a whole lot that turn. Yeah, so playing all those heroic followers and whatnot for really like cheap and swinging face is nice, but what if I could tell you they could hit the gym and get even stronger? Well, these are all the buff cards that are in Swordcraft, and some of them you can play off of heroic entry, some of them you can't. So they're in the form of Forged Weaponry, Luminous Knight, Royal Banner, and Fencer. These are all pretty good cards to buff your heroic followers to make them even stronger so they'll swing for more. And you want to push out as much damage as you can really quickly before you gas out. So here are cards that help that. Forged Weaponry is like a 2-drop quick. You select the follower on your field, give it +1/+1, and then you draw a card. Pretty nice. You have Luminous Knight, she's also a 2-drop. She's probably more practical because she has that stat line of being a 3/1, but her defense really does stink. But you select another follower on the field and give +1 attack, and then when she dies, you still do the same thing as the Fanfare ability. Then really, if you're struggling against those decks that you can't really get rid of, you have Royal Banner, and you give each follower on your field +1/+1, and then whenever you play a Swordcraft follower, you give a +1/+1. So not only if you're playing heroic entry, they're already coming in with that +1/+1, and then if it's a heroic follower that you get off of heroic entry, you get another +1, so a +2/+2, if anything. And then we have Fencer, she's probably not too, special or anything, she's just a 3-drop follower with a good stat line, and then when she's played, you give another follower +1/+1, which is nice. Alright, so here are kind of the late game options you want to put in for the heroic sword deck. So we have Takao and Leonidas. Those are honestly must-haves in the deck, honestly. Just rock a 1 or 2 move of Leonidas just for the Leonidas Resolve token, and your heroic followers will just come out really strong just from that. And then you have Takao Teo, which is also a must-have just for the fact it's removal and put into a follower. It's pretty nice, and her Evo is pretty nice too. Albert and Narita are really kind of case specific. So if you're really trying to end the game pretty nicely, I'd say Albert is a nice pick. You're running low of cards in your hand. When you draw an Albert, taking the fact that you can swing twice on Evo is still nice. And then Narita Bryan, if you're going up against a really control matchup and you're having the hardest time trying to, end the game. So Narita Bryan can do that and, have a really strong ward that can have solid removal in it too in case you need it. All right, so let's go ahead and figure out what the game plan for Heroic Sword is. And honestly, to be frank with you, it's just to swing as hard as they can, very fast at you. And you know, turn 3, you're probably gonna take the most damage that you possibly can without, if you don't have any solid defense on turns 1 and 2. So I think Dragoncraft is gonna have a little bit of a harder time against this deck because they'll be starting off so low. But on the fact that, you know, Dragoncraft has the ability to heal, you know, they can make up for it in those later turns. But back to Heroic Sword, and not trailing off too much. The fact that, you know, turns 1s and 2s are pretty critical because they're going to be playing the Ironward Defender and that Emiro Spear Knight. And, you know, already the fact that they already have 2 followers that are heroic on the field already should scare you already. Because when you get rid of them, then, you know, the Ironward Defender is going to get that +1 defense and ward if you deal with these guys. And then, you know, turn 3, they're going to Heroic Entry. And even when they Heroic Entry, if they don't get Mach Knight, then they're going to get another 3-drop follower, that being either Gemstaff Commander or Floral Fencer, and they're going to be generating so much aggression and on that turn 3. And if you don't have a way to deal with that, then every time they play something, it's just going to generate some value of some sort, either in playing a follower or playing another follower, and then they get some stat boost. So watch out for that. Another thing to really watch out for is really the mid game, because they're gonna have like a really weird time going with the Valiant Fencer if they don't have like the Emiro Spear Knight. So make sure you take care of those other followers as soon as you can. And if you have board wipes, board wipe them as much as you can, because if you board wipe them, they've used all the cards in their hand to play something, and if they can't generate any value from swinging, then they're going to lose. Lastly, a thing to watch out for is the Leonidas play. Make sure you get rid of that amulet as soon as you can, because the fact that, you know, they don't have a big hand size, but let's say, you know, they have 0 cards in hand, and next turn they draw, they have the Leonidas Resolve token on the field, and then they play Emiro Spear Knight and they evolve him. Well, Emiro Spear Knight becomes a 6/6, and then he can swing because he has that rush, and he becomes a 7/7, and he swings at your ward that you kept up last turn because he has no cards in hand. But guess what? Emiro Spear Knight has that Evo, and he's going to use Heroic Entry. And if he Heroic Entries and he gets that Mach Knight, he can probably clear the game, if he needs to. Alright, Scholars, before we get into some matchups, I wanted to show you some tech I discovered while going through this deck. So we have Avant Blader. So on Avant Blader Evo, it tells you can search for 2 officer followers and reveal them, and then add them to your hand. Well, you know, from your deck, of course. But, you know, if you've noticed, every single heroic follower besides Valiant Fencer has the officer tag. So Avant Blader is not a useless card in this deck. So the fact that, you know, if you're running low in hand size, you're rocking at 1 or 2 cards, and, you know, that's okay because you're putting against, you know, so much aggression. The one thing that Swordcraft had in, you know, its tempo deck was, you know, just so much hand replacement. So if you really need to hit those 3 cards in hand type ordeal, you can play Avant Blader and search out any one of those officer followers, that being the heroic cards, the Mach Knight, Emiro, or Ironward Defender, depending on what you need. And she also has a good stat line of being a 5/5 on Evo to swing at people with. Alright, so let's go ahead and get into the good and bad matchups for the Heroic Sword. So, in the form of good matchups, we have Forestcraft, Abysscraft, you know, the Umacraft, and Dragoncraft. So let me go ahead and explain myself. Alright, so Dragoncraft, it is very nice to go up against, but you really have to get under them. And the later the games goes, that's the stronger assistance of Shenlong happening. And Shenlong definitely destroys your deck, but on the fact that Shenlong is only limited to 1, you're only going to see him 1. So if they don't see him that game and you're playing so fast, then, you know, that doesn't really do well for dragons. You just have to be careful when you play your heroic entry that the Dragon Warrior is definitely going to happen. So you have to play very smart against dragons to really get through to them. But also on the other fact that, you know, dragons does have the discard line where they don't have very many cards in hand too. Well, the sad thing about Dragoncraft, unlike you, Swordcraft, you can play a follower that looks for any follow in your deck. Dragoncraft can't do that. So you have to use that optimally and play very smart against them to really get under them and finish the game off. Moving on to Umacraft. So the one thing about Umacraft is you have to be very careful. Even though you can swing first against their deck and then hit them really hard, they can recover in terms of super creep if they get that far. And then also on the fact that they have spell cards to really hurt your deck. So you can really go in for a big play, and then they can play the quick spell to just destroy your follower, which is something to really watch out for. But you have to remember, You know, those cards aren't guaranteed, and they're only looking at the top card of their deck. They're not going and searching for it. There's no way, you know, they're not drawing like 2 cards a turn. You just have to be very smart on how you play your plays. And, you know, if you get through to their spells, then it really should be an optimal matchup for you. All right, so looking at the Abyss aggro matchup as the good matchup, you know, one thing that Abyss aggro does is, yes, they can be aggressive too, but the other thing is that they're going to be generating value through taking their own life, and that's fine, because you're going to want to take their life even faster. So they'll make them second guess what they're doing. Hey, you know, using this Razorly Claw, really a good idea to deal 3 damage to them, even though they're going to be swinging at me for like 7 next turn. Well, you know, that's the only way they're going to be doing things. And yes, Soul Dealer is a card to deal 3 damage to themselves and heal from whatever follower you play. But the really highest card that you're going to be playing through attack-wise is probably 5. If they get your 7-drop follower, that's fine. But, you know, Leonidas Resolve will definitely fix up that life difference towards the end of the game if they get that far, and just Leonidas really carries in that matchup. Lastly, working at the Forestcraft. So I wouldn't say Forestcraft is the go-to matchup, because they do have that Ancient Elf with, you know, where they bounce back any card and it becomes a 3/3, and usually they leave it unengaged, and that's fine, but they'll swing for 5 and you'll have quite the time getting rid of that card. Well, your Swordcraft, so maybe you have a way using Unbridled Fury as some tech, or like a whole sword swing if you put it in your deck. But you do have the Old Man and Old Woman that came out in set 3 that has Bane, so that's something you can probably use to get through to those wards. And when we go into the sample deck list after we're done with this, I'll show you what potential upgrades we can do to make that matchup even better. Alright, now let's look at the bad matchups. Yes, I see that we have Abyss up here twice, but we'll get into that. But in the forms of bad matchups, those are the control things and things that really can get over you in the mid game, or when they have a way better late game because they've been removing all your stuff in the mid game to get into the late game. And that is in the form of Havencraft, Runecraft, the control version of Abyss, and then Sword itself being the mid-tempo version. So in terms of Havencraft, I know there is that new Egg Haven, and the fact that the Egg Haven does X amount of damage to your board and X amount to your face is really going to hurt, because they're always going to be board wiping with that explosion card. But if we're talking about, you know, traditional Haven, they have Themis Decree, and then other stuff like Priest of Kojal, just lots of removal to get rid of your stuff. Next, we're moving on to the Runecraft. Runecraft is just basically spells. So all the spells that they have are really going to remove. Like if you're playing a traditional, you know, like D-shift list, yes, if they break on like the spells, then yeah, you're having a good time. But, you know, most of the time they're going to have spells that either being Fire Chain, the Execution, Fiery Embrace, just lots and lots of removal that you can't do anything about because they're just spells in their hand. Looking at the terms of the Abyss control player, it's going to be a very hard matchup for you because you don't already have a big hand size as it is, and you don't really draw that much in your deck. Well, Abyss control does not have that problem. If they can cater their deck to, yeah, if I'm struggling with drawing, I can make it to where I draw. And then they're always going to be healing. Yeah, you can do your damage, but it's going to get healed in some sort of way. And they're sniping cards out of your hand, so it's not a very good matchup for you. Alright, and lastly, we're looking at Swordcraft. So you don't really have a very big hand size. We've definitely gone over that. Well, the, you know, temple version of Swordcraft does have a hand size, so they're going to have options to getting rid of things. You can try your best to get through to them as best as you can, but as soon as they drop like Veteran Lancer, it slows you down a turn. If they're rocking Bellringer in their deck, it slows you down. It's very bad, because the later the game goes on and you're against the Swordcraft like mid-tempo, Mirror, it's not very good, because they get into that mid-game, they drop that Floor Fencer, or, you know, they do that Amelia and burn your guy for 4. You're like, alright, well, you know, I did swing with him that turn, you got rid of him, now I have to figure out what I'm going to do next. And it hurts even more if you whiff on a heroic entry. Alrighty, we have finally made it to the end of the little breakdown. Thank you so much for being here. If you're new, then we usually do a grade system on every deck that comes out. Usually we give it between grades from S tier to, you know, being super amazing, A for being, you know, awesome, B for being, you know, B tier, C, it's not that good, probably take it to locals, and then D tier or F tier being like just the worst possible and just straight trash. Well, let's figure out what in the world can we give Heroic Sword as a grade. And yes, as you guessed it, we're gonna give Heroic Sword an A. this is a pretty good deck. I feel like you could take this to locals and swamp face with it. You can honestly probably take it to any, you know, Shadow Showdown and swamp face with it. It's really RNG based. It's kind of just like Abysscraft aggro. You know, if you see the cards, it's gonna be absolutely amazing for you. And if you don't, you're not really gonna have a good time. So make sure you cater your deck and make it very consistent when you do your heroic entry play, which needs to happen on turn 3. If not, then you know, that's fine too. You can play something else on turn 3. But that's usually the turn you really want to do. You want to use that heroic entry on turn 3. You know, pray to the RNGesus that you can get a pretty good card off the top 4. And, you know, play that card and then move forward from there. And then, you know, the later the game goes on, it gets a little more dangerous, but, you know, you're Swordcraft, so you have really good options. That being Tokayoteo and Leonidas, just forms of big followers that you can follow up with in your later turns to have some really good value and whatnot. So we're going to give Heroic Sword an A, and that's a pretty solid way to end it. Alright, before I end off the video, I want to give a huge shout out to Shinto Senpai for dropping, you know, this pretty good information and, you know, a sample deck list for, you know, what to play for set 3, because, you know, in Japan they already had like all this stuff dominating and they have this stuff already figured out. They're in the future in comparison to us. But this is a sample deck list for Heroic Sword. You know, you can definitely cater it to how you want to, you know, mess around with the ratios. You have the old woman card that was the old man and old woman card that has that Bane, and it's a 1-drop that can help you with those wards. But this is a pretty good sample deck list. I would definitely, you know, if you do net deck, I would net deck this and then build, you know, rearrange the ratios or whatever you want to build into your fancy, because everybody plays a different way. But this is a pretty good sample list of what the Heroic Sword looks like, what to expect, all the cards that are going to come up in terms of, like, you know, playing the heroic entry, and then, you know, getting into those late games with Tokayoteo and Leonidas. And then, you know, if you're a really good Swordcraft player, you can definitely surprise them with some spice that you put in the deck. Well, alright guys, that is the end of the video. I appreciate you watching so much. Make sure you're safe in whatever you do tonight, and safe whatever you do for the rest of the year. I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.
I gave you all my love, baby, my heart is cold when you're around. You warm it up, liquid gold, baby, yeah, you warm it up, liquid gold, baby, and my affection, all that paper you wasted. Take my love.